The Bach Flower Remedies are a unique healing system created by Dr. Edward Bach between 1928 and 1935. During this time, he discovered the 38 remedies that would form his new system of healing. He also designed 2 new ways in which the energetics of those plants would be extracted and used to create the mother tinctures. While the Bach flower remedies are often classified as homeopathic medicines, in many of his writings, Dr. Bach himself was clear that his system was actually different to homeopathy and homeopathic remedies. While both use highly diluted natural medicinal substances and have an energy-based healing action, Bach flower remedies are only sourced from non-toxic plant material, and his actual method of preparing the remedies is different as well. Homeopathy bases its treatments on a specific principle that like treats like, known as the law of similars. On the other hand, Dr. Bach's system is based on the belief that the ultimate cause of disease was a lack of inner harmony, and when this disharmony was resolved, health would have come back naturally. He believed that there was a connection between the personality of an individual, their mental and emotional state, and how they reacted to life in general, and their state of health. His approach was that in order to allow healing to occur, one should address the personality, mental and emotional states of the individual, particularly those that were out of balance. His remedies are chosen based on the emotions being experienced by the individual and not by their physical symptoms. While Eastern medicine has always focused on treating the individual as a whole and not just their symptoms, Western medicine has a long history of following a much more mechanical approach and focuses on the body systems and the symptoms being experienced. The fact that the focus was on the illness and its symptoms, and that the individual experiencing them was totally ignored, was something that Dr. Bach had a real problem with. We have to keep in mind that the science we know today as psychoneuroimmunology, which studies the relationship between immunity, the endocrine system, and the central and peripheral nervous systems, wasn't discovered until the 1980s, long after Dr. Bach created his system of Bach flower remedies. Dr. Candace Pert, an internationally recognized neuroscientist and pharmacologist, who was often called the mother of psychoneuroimmunology, published over 250 research articles and was a significant contributor to the emergence of the mind-body medicine as an area of legitimate scientific research in the 1980s, said, "Since emotions run every system in the body, don't underestimate their power to treat and heal." Her book, Molecules of Emotion, The Science Behind Mind and Body Medicine, published in 1997, her appearance in the film What the Bleep Do We Know, and her follow-up book, Everything You Need to Know to Feel God, or Good, with the second O in brackets, published in 2007, made these concepts much more accessible to the general public. Before exploring the remedies themselves in more detail, let's take a look at how Edward Bach came to create a whole new method of healing. But before we do that, I just want to address the discussion that often comes up as to how to pronounce his last name. As you have heard, I pronounce it Bach, like the composer. But in England, many pronounce it Bach. In his book, The Bach Flower Remedies, Questions and Answers, John Ramsell tells us that Dr. Bach's family originally came to England from Wales, and the typical pronunciation there would have been soft and guttural, like the composer. but apparently the English had more difficulty with this pronunciation, which was particularly evident when Dr. Bach began his medical training at the University College Hospital. Everyone was calling him Bach, and at least in England, that is the name that stuck. I took all 3 levels of my Bach flower training in Canada, and here the soft pronunciation of Bach was always used. At the Bach Center in the UK, they still continue to use the pronunciation Bach, but they also accept both pronunciations as being acceptable. When I originally took my certification in 2003 to 2004, my focus was on getting to know as much about the remedies that I could. I wanted to use them for myself and my clients, so I didn't pay much attention to the fact that there was actually very little covered about Dr. Bach and his private life, or about how he came to discover and develop his new system of healing. When I came to write this workshop, I did do an extensive search through all my Bach remedy books, and I did a Google search, but didn't find very much at all. The main source of any private information I could find was in Nora Weeks's book, The Medical Discoveries of Edward Bach. But even she didn't share anything about the private man, other than to say he was a very private person. I was able to flesh things out just a little bit from Julian Barnard's book, Bach Flower Remedies, Form and Function, as he has an appendix at the back of the book listing chronology from 1886 to 2002, which does include some information from public records. This is what I can share. He was born on September the 24th, 1886 in Moseley, Birmingham, England. Nora Weeks wrote that he was an intuitive, delicate, but independent child with a great love of nature and an overwhelming compassion for any who suffered. And he dreamed of finding a simple form of medicine that would cure all forms of disease. He left school at 16 and went to work in the family's brass foundry in Birmingham. According to Nora, even though he had a strong desire to enter the medical profession, he didn't want his parents to have this expense. Apparently, he found the 3 years he spent here very challenging. His free, sensitive nature was happiest when he was outdoors, but here he was stuck inside the foundry. For a short time, he also tried his hand as a commercial traveler for the firm, where at least he would be outdoors. Although his people skills were excellent, his lack of business instincts let him down, and he would return with a book full of orders at prices that the firm just couldn't fulfill. So he was moved back to other work. He had never given up his desire to study medicine, and now his father encouraged him to follow his heart, agreeing not only to pay the fees, but also to give him an allowance. So he immediately started studying for matriculation, and in 1906, at the age of 20, he entered the Birmingham University. From there, he continued his training at the University College Hospital, London, and qualified in 1912, obtaining his medical qualifications as well as a diploma of public health at Cambridge. In January 1913, he married his first wife, Gwendolyn Kager, and later that year became the casualty medical officer at the University College Hospital. When World War I broke out in 1914, he tried to enlist, but because of his health was refused. For the rest of the duration of the war, he was in charge of over 400 war beds at the University College Hospital, while at the same time pursuing his research in the bacteriological department. According to public records, a daughter was born to Edward Bach and Kitty Light in 1916, but no more information is available on his daughter. In April 1917, his first wife, Gwendolyn, died of diphtheria, and in May of that year he married his second wife, Kitty Light. His health had never been robust, and in July 1917 he collapsed and required an immediate operation. A cancerous tumor was removed, but it was expected to spread, and he was only given 3 months to live. He was determined to complete his research work and return to the hospital laboratories as soon as he could. His determination to complete his work led to a complete recovery, and when he later developed his remedies, he was strongly influenced by the belief that following one's true vocation is essential to spiritual and physical health. He continued this work, but felt that his work was still in its infancy. Towards the end of 1918, the University College Hospital made the decision to restrict any of their staff from working outside of the hospital. This was a pivotal moment for Bach, as he was determined to continue working on his research. Although hard-pressed for money, he set up his experimental laboratory. Shortly after, the post of pathologist and bacteriologist at the London Homeopathic Hospital became available, and he remained here until 1922. He was also interested in the person, their emotions, and how they reacted. He had watched and learned from the men on the foundry floor, and as a doctor he was always more interested in his patients than in the symptoms they were displaying. Learning more about homeopathy, he was struck by the fact that Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, had recognized the importance of personality in disease 150 years before. The more he learned, the more he started to develop his own ideas and theories. And in 1922, he began a Harley Street practice and moved his laboratory to Park Crescent. This was also the year he separated from his second wife, Kitty. He now began to combine homeopathic principles with his knowledge of orthodox medicine, and over time he developed the 7 Bach no-sodes, vaccines based on intestinal bacteria, which purified the intestinal tract with remarkable effects on the patient's general health and on difficult chronic conditions like arthritis. He also continued to see patients at his Harley Street practice. 1928 was also a memorable year as it heralded the birth of his new work. From early on, he had always relied on and trusted his intuition to guide him. He decided that it was time to replace his 7 bacterial no-sodes with more natural plants and herbs. So he was now spending as much time as he could spare from his practice and lab out in nature, searching for the right specimens. He tested many of them, but wasn't satisfied, and he didn't know what was missing. Then, one evening, while attending a dinner in a large banqueting hall, he had a revelation. As he watched his fellow guests, he realized that the whole of humanity consisted of a number of different groups of types. That every type individual in that large hall belonged to one or other of these groups. He spent the rest of the evening watching all the people he could see. He continued to expand his knowledge on the type groups and wondered how this could be applied to disease and its cure. His next inspiration was that the individuals of each group would not suffer from the same kinds of diseases, but that all those in any one group would react in the same manner to any illness. Looking at his fellow guests, he realized that they fell into several distinct types. This was the beginning, but it was not until he left London in 1930 that he would be able to give his full attention to this study. That autumn, he had a sudden urge to visit Wales, and obeying the impulse, he was led to discover two plants, Mimulus and Impatiens. He brought them back to London and prepared them in the same way as he did the oral vaccines, and prescribed them according to his patient's personality, with immediate and successful results. Later that year, he added clematis. Towards the end of 1929, he was so convinced that he would now be able to replace the bacterial nosodes with the pure and simple herbs of the field, that he decided to give up all other methods of treatment and only use these three remedies while seeking others to add to their number. He knew he was on the brink of developing an entirely new system of medicine, although he had no real conception as to the exact form that this would take. In the spring of 1930, at the age of 43, he gave up everything he had built in London, closing both his practice and laboratory, and he moved to Wales so he could search for more remedies. He now spent a lot of time walking through nature, searching, observing, and considering. It was early one morning when walking through a dew-laden field that he was struck by the idea that each dewdrop, as it was heated by the sun, would acquire the healing powers of the plant it lay on. That inspired him to develop a method of preparing remedies using pure water. Later that year, he wrote his short book, Heal Thyself, with its message that physical disease is the result of being at odds with one's spiritual purpose. It was published in 1931 and has remained in print ever since. From August 1930 until 1934, Dr. Bach based himself in Cromer on the Norfolk coast and continued to find and prepare further flower remedies. He also successfully treated many patients with them. Nora Weeks had accompanied him to Wales to be his assistant, and it was in Cromer that he met Victor Bullen, who would later help Nora take the legacy of Dr. Bach's work forward after his death. In 1934, he moved to Mount Vernon, the small cottage in the village of Sotwell near Wallingford. He felt at home here and decided that this was where he would continue his work from. He worked extensively in the gardens, growing many of the plants the remedies were being prepared from. He even made most of his furniture himself. Over the last 6 years, he had discovered 19 remedies, and now that he was settled at Mount Vernon, he continued his search for the final 19 remedies that would complete his system. It was in March 1935 that he found the first remedy of the new series, cherry plum. For some days before, he had experienced a severe inflammation of the sinuses, which was accompanied by pain so intense that he felt desperate, as though life was no longer possible without loss of reason. He knew that he was on the verge of discovering the remedy for this state of mind, and went out looking for it early in the morning. He found a hedge white with the blossoms of cherry plum, and he picked some of the flowering sprigs and took them back with him. Because the plant is of a tough and woody nature, and the sun in the early spring didn't have the strength it gains later on in the year, he decided to boil the flowering sprigs in water on the fire. He let them simmer for an hour and strained off the fluid when it had cooled, and took 2 drops of the remedy. Almost at once his mental anguish ceased, and with it the physical pain, and by the next morning he was completely well. During the 5 months that followed, he found the remaining 18 remedies and used the boiling method to prepare all but one of them. Nora Weeks writes in her book, "The strain of these 6 months was great. Remedy after remedy had been found and prepared in quick succession, and the mental and physical agony he experienced before the discovery of each had been so severe that he was left very exhausted and weak. Although the discovery of these remedies appears so simple, yet only those working and living with him could tell of the almost superhuman courage and determination which he needed and which he possessed to enable him to endure these experiences." Quite something, eh? His system was now complete, but he was exhausted. Although he continued with his work, seeing patients, training his team, and publishing writings, his health was failing. By October 1936, his health had deteriorated badly, and he was confined to bed. Although this did not stop him from working and dealing with large amounts of correspondence, and his focus continued to be on ensuring that his work would continue. He passed peacefully in his sleep on November the 27th, 1936, and is buried at Stotwell. The cause of his death was listed as cardiac failure and sarcoma, and Nora Weeks was the sole beneficiary under his will. Dr. Bach entrusted the full responsibility for the continuation of his work to the friends and colleagues he had trained. He also requested that his home should remain the hub of the work. In 1955, a fund was created to purchase Mount Vernon, and in 1958, the Dr. Bach Healing Trust was established. Its goals were to purchase the property and pay for its maintenance, and to promote and expand the work as the trustees thought fit. The first trustees were Nora Weeks, Victor Bullen, and Francis Thomas. In 1971, Nikki Murray and her brother John Ramsell joined the Bach Center, and in 1973 they became trustees of the Dr. Bach Healing Trust. Victor Bullen died in May 1975, leaving everything to Nora Weeks. Nora continued the work until she died peacefully in her sleep in January 1978, and left her residual estate to the trustees of the Dr. Bach Trust. John's daughter, Judy Ramsell Howard, joined the Bach Center in 1985, and in 1989 it was set up as a registered charity at Mount Vernon. Since her father's retirement, Judy Ramsell Howard has been the center's managing director, and together with her co-director, Stephen Ball, who joined them in 1996, they run the center together. When the demand for the essences grew, the Bach Center partnered with Nelson's Pharmacy to make and bottle the essences, and they are the only maker authorized by the Bach Center. Although the center is no longer directly responsible for making mother tinctures or selling them, they continue the work of educating others about these wonderful remedies. So there you have it, some of the history that has gone into the creation of the wonderful Bach remedies that are available for us to use today.